Hello everybody and welcome back to Mosse on a Monday for November 2022. You know the drill by now. Each month I pluck from my bookshelves two books that are fiction, two books that are non-fiction that I've really enjoyed and I just want to share with you. I'm being slightly sneaky again this month because there's one that technically is described as a novel, but actually I think it should be better seen as non-fiction. So we'll come to that in a moment. So I'm going to start with the Women's Prize for Fiction winner of 2018, and it was Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie. This is the beautiful original edition, and the picture you'll see on your screens, of course, is the paperback that is available now. But I thought this was the moment to go back to this extraordinary novel because it has almost taken on the form of non-fiction, if you like, and it's very, very prescient. So the story is of a young woman called Isma, who has brought up her two siblings, who are twins, much younger than her, after the death of her mother and grandmother. She's British Muslim, she lives in London, and as the novel opens, she is leaving, finally, free of her responsibilities, if you like, to look after her little sister and little brother, who are now grown-ups themselves, to go to America to study. But when she gets to the airport, because she's a Muslim, really, she's taken aside and she's taken into an interrogation room and is kept there for so long that she misses her flight. And it's an extraordinarily powerful opening to this novel because she's us. Could it be any of us? Could be absolutely any of us. But that moment of being taken into a room and not knowing what the rules are and knowing that there's nothing she can say about who she is or what she does that might be believed captures the sense of complete fear and terror that many people have when they're trying to travel across the road. And I'm going to read you the opening just so you know. Isma was going to miss her flight. The ticket wouldn't be refunded because the airline took no responsibility for passengers who arrived at the airport 3 hours ahead of departure time and were escorted to an interrogation room. She had expected the interrogation, but not the hours of waiting that would precede it, nor that it would feel so humiliating to have the contents of her suitcase inspected. She'd made sure not to pack anything that would invite comment or questions, no Quran, no family pictures, no books on her area of academic interest. But even so, the officer took hold of every item of Isma's clothing and ran it between her thumb and fingers, not so much searching for hidden pockets as judging the quality of the material. So the story follows Isma, and we learn about her younger sister who is much more sure of her place in the world, doesn't feel that she always has to justify that she is British and she is a Muslim and the colour of her skin doesn't make her less patriotic than anybody else. But the twin brother has followed in the footsteps of his jihadist father, a man that nobody knew, and has vanished from their lives. And she starts to enlist the help of a young man who is the son of the first Muslim Home Secretary of the United Kingdom. This novel was written in 2017 and it won the Women's Prize in 2018. And at the heart of it is what is family, what is identity, what is nationality, what happens when you are part of a group that becomes vilified, so whatever you say is used as a weapon against you, or what happens if, as in this Home Secretary, you have completely denied your Muslim roots and your brown skin in order to get on in a particular form of political manoeuvring. So if you like, you have become more racist, more outspoken, more determined to prove that you are more British than any other person who might be sitting at the cabinet table with you. This is where novels matter, because a writer as beautiful as Kamila Shamsie, her prose is so elegant, so clean, her description so unhurried, but yet very, very hard emotional punch comes through the whole of this novel. It is sometimes the novelist that can put the voice to something that we can all see happening about us and don't really know what to do to change it. And of course, things since Kamila Shamsie published this novel have only got more diversive and more acute and less able for there to be any nuance and subtlety in between. And I promise you, it's one of the greatest and most heart-wrenching final scenes that you will ever read in a novel. So that is my first choice for November, Kamila Shamsie, Home Fire, and it's published by Bloomsbury. Now, my second choice for Mosse on a Monday for November is my sneaky one. I always have a sneaky one now, I realise. And it is this extraordinary, beautiful, slim, elegant, perfect book, The Castle of Cross Destinies by Italo Calvino, which obviously was originally written in Italian, and it appeared in its first English translation in 1977. I'm afraid I can't tell you the translator because it's a wonderful thing nowadays to put the name of the translator in the front of translated books, but then it wasn't, so the copyright line, I'm afraid, belongs to the publisher, not the person who did it. But this is a complete classic in the world of literature inspired by tarot. Now, any of you who've read my books will know that in my very, very earliest books, there's quite often reference to tarot. Sepulchre, which is the second of my novels in my Languedoc trilogy, has a deck of, imagined deck, the Vernet Tarot at the heart of it. And in fact, tarot again makes an appearance in the novel I'm writing at the moment, which is the third of the Joubert family chronicles, which will be called The Ghost Ship. And tarot appears then because that moment, particularly in Protestant France, when cartomancy and augury started to be visible on the street but seen as very undermining of faith, is obviously something that you can imagine appeals to me enormously. So I'm looking at the Marseille Tarot at the moment. Now, this extraordinary book, even though it's described as a novel, it's in a category of its own. Let's just say it's that. Because Calvino has an explanation right at the end. He has a wonderful note. And he explains why he wanted to write about tarot. And he says, I published this book to be free of it. It has obsessed me for years. I began by trying to line up tarots at random to see if I could read a story in them. The Waverer's Tale emerged and I started writing it down. I realised the tarots were a machine for conducting stories. I thought of a book and I imagined its frame, the mute narrators, the forest, the inn. I was tempted by the diabolical idea of conjuring up all the stories that could be contained in a tarot deck. Now, that is an incredible description. I mean, he, of course, was an extraordinary writer of what it feels like to have a kind of urgency and a desperation to tell a particular type of story or to be carrying a story in you that you can't quite find its form. And in this, there are two separate bits. There's the Castle of Cross Destinies, which is, you know, the overall title of this volume, but it's the first part of the book. And the second one is the Tavern of Cross Destinies. And each is inspired by a different tarot deck. So the Castle is inspired by the Visconti deck, the Italian deck, and the Tavern is inspired by the famous French deck, the Marseille Tarot, which I mentioned. There are wanderers in a wood. It's kind of as mystical and fairy tale as that. And they are making towards the castle in the first one, the tavern in the second one, if you like, drawn from the darkness of the forest into the light, the one light that's shining in the middle of the darkness. And when they get in to the castle and then to the tavern, they discover they can't speak. So the only way that they can communicate with one another is to draw cards down and let the cards do the speaking for them. Now, those of you who know tarot will know that there are 78 cards in a tarot deck. They're divided into the major and the minor arcana. The major arcana are are numbered, bar one. The Fool is not numbered. And they start with, in the French deck, the Bateleur, who is the magician, or possibly the sorcerer. And they go through many that you will know, like the Hanged Man, the Priestess, all of these extraordinary, beautiful cards. And then you have the minor arcana, which are the kings, queens, page and knight, and then the suits, which are cups, wands, coins, swords. And every single card has a particular interpretation, and cards have a different interpretation depending on whether they're upright, as it were, or reversed. And all of the tarot is about storytelling. It's not saying, this is what will happen to you. It's about an interpretation of what you are trying to ask yourself, what question you are asking of the cards, if you like. So much fiction has been inspired by tarot. But if you have any interest in cartomancy, I suppose, or the idea of whether humankind is free to decide its own pattern and fate, or whether all of these things are preordained or predestined, then you couldn't find a more perfect expression of how the cards might work and how storytelling works, what character is, how we interpret the looks and the size and the non-words of the other people around us. And of course everybody comes together in these two places, and then at the end the cards are scattered and the people go back out into the darkness. It's a book that is of course a metaphor for human existence. It's a book about storytelling and writing, but it deserves its place to be one of the great classics of tarot literature. So, Italo Calvino, The Castle of Crossed Destinies, and it's available as a vintage paperback. Now, my first proper non-fiction pick for November's Mosse on a Monday is a book that's not actually coming out until next March, so I'm sorry about that. But I've just read it and it blew me away, so I wanted to talk about it, actually. And it is a book called Quartet, How 4 Women Changed the Musical World. This is the proof. And it's by a music historian called Leah Broad. And it's a group biography of a group of women who were not actually a group at all. It's not like writing about the Lakeland Poets or the Bloomsbury Set, but they were all women trying to make their way in the classical music world, the very misogynist, sexist classical music world of the late 19th century and early 20th century. And what she's done is use each of the 4 lives to show how classical music changed, how women's place in the world changed, how some composers become famous and staples of programs and others do not. And she also uses it as a way to shine a light on what Victorian society was like, what Edwardian society was like, what it was like in those years in London during the First World War, when almost all of the programming vanished because most of it was German compositions, and oddly the opportunities that gave for women composers, because suddenly they needed English work and there weren't enough people being performed. So the 4 women are these. Ethel Smythe, the great and mighty Ethel Smythe, who was born in 1858. And she, of course, is known for her operas like The Boatswain's Mate, which is actually a suffragette comedy, the magnificent The Wreckers. She was also a queer icon. She was a suffragette. She wrote The March of the Women. She was the very close friend of Emmeline Pankhurst, probably her lover for many years, and was an active, campaigning, imprisoned woman as part of the suffrage movement, but at the same time became the only female composer ever to be given a damehood, and became a legend within the classical music world as well. So by being outspoken, somehow she still found her place in the classical music world. Extraordinary. I'm writing about her myself and I learned so much from the book. Then Rebecca Clark, who was born in 1886, and she was a viola player and is the first woman to have been hired by a professional orchestra. And she became celebrated in the end for her modernist experimentation. And she was very outspoken about music. There's a wonderful scene in the book where she goes to hear Schoenberg being performed just before the First World War, and just laughs and says, you know, this isn't music, this is noise. And of course her view was common at the time, and of course times change. So there's a lot about her and how music becomes fashionable and goes out of fashion. Then Dorothy Howell, who was born in 1898, who was a prodigy, and she shot to fame, became a household name in 1919 at the Proms. And what Leah Broad does so well is explains how difficult that can be. You know, we all know the story of Mozart, the child prodigy. We all know the incredibly sexist responses to Clara Schumann's music. It explained that, oh, you know, it's only because of her husband that she is listened to at all. But of course, she was a child prodigy pianist a long time before anybody had heard of him. So again, that's a different sort of angle on classical music. And then finally, Doreen Carwithen, who was born in 1922, who was one of Britain's very first female film composers and who never wanted to make a fuss, and in the end did subsume her entire personality into looking after the man with whom she had a 20-year hidden affair, her composition tutor, and later married. But she, if you like, flew under the radar. And when she discovered she was being paid less than everybody else, she just thought that was hard luck. She should just shut up about it. So they are very different women. And there is a rallying cry in this book in the end, which is that we, the audiences who like classical music, or we, the audiences who are interested in women and the discrimination or the difficulties that women artists might face, we need to be saying, we want to hear this work programmed, because it's only by work being programmed and becoming a staple of the concert circuit that the work, the beautiful, heartbreaking, delicate, muscular, in the case of Ethel Smythe, work will sustain. So I cannot recommend this book enough. Quartet, How Four Women Changed the Musical World, and it will be published by Faber at the beginning of March. You won't regret it. And now I have saved the best for last. And yes, I admit there is an element of bias in this, but I'm just lucky enough to know all about it. And so my fourth choice for November's Mosse on a Monday is this beautiful and wonderful book by, indeed, my husband, The Coming Darkness by Greg Mosse. And it comes with two wonderful quotes from Lee Child. Greg Mosse writes like John le Carré's hip grandson, and then Anthony Horowitz saying a big, meaty, ambitious thriller. And neither Lee nor Anthony are married to Greg, so they know what they're talking about. So this is the most gripping, inspiring, timely thriller that you're going to read this side of Christmas and possibly all of next year. It's what I'm now being told is called cli-fi, which is climate fiction. It's set in 2037, mostly in Paris, but also in other parts of the world. And it is a world that is ours, but just a bit more so. So everything that we are thinking about in terms of climate, in terms of the movement of world populations, in terms of the way that different countries are manipulating each other's election process, their secrets, the way that in which they're doing business, it's all coming true here. And sadly, it isn't a world that we can't recognise. The lead character, the hero, is a man called Alex Lamarck, and he works for the French Secret Service. This is proper thriller, espionage thriller writing, which is an area that I love. And he is one of those beguiling characters. He's not the French James Bond, because he has much more nuance and many more questions in himself. But at the heart of the novel is not only will they be in time to stop the coming darkness, will they be in time to stop the things that are happening in the country that was Libya and is now seceded, or other parts of the world where the data cables are being held to ransom or challenged. It's not just about the individual things that happen, but it's about Alex's doubt that he is working to do everything he can to make the world a safer and a fairer place. But who can he trust? Is the person who runs him a good person or a difficult person? And another thing that makes him so different is at the heart of Greg Mosse's book is the idea of women and men working together side by side. This is not a story where you have women who come in their glamorous clothes and go out again. Some of the key characters who are also working in this world, trying to find a way to build a better, safer world and to hold back the chaos and the tragedy that might be coming, are Alex's mother, an historian who is an extraordinary character, or equally the woman he loves, Mariam, who has a secret part of her life as well. So the thing that's frustrating is I can't tell you any of the story because it's a thriller. But all I can tell you is if you love the work of John le Carré, if you love the work of Lee Child, actually, if you love the work of some of those older Cold War stories, sort of Kollowitz Heights, and all of those kind of Russian Cold War stories, this is going to be the thriller for you. And the very good news is, it comes out on Thursday. And therefore you could buy it. you could be reading it right now. Just imagine how fantastic that will be. And it's published by a wonderful new emerging press called Moonflower Books. And you will see that they have the best sprayed edges, spridges apparently they're called, that you will see. So when you buy your own, you could buy several as Christmas presents. And I'm sure that if you can find a bookseller that will send it to you, Greg would sign them all for you. So although obviously I'm joking, that of course I'm biased, Greg Mosse, as many of you will know, is a teacher of creative writing. He has helped so many writers to find their voice and to see their books in print. And so there is nobody who deserves a beautiful publication more than him. So this one's for you, darling. The Coming Darkness, Greg Mosse, published by Moonflower Books. So that's it for November's Mosse on a Monday. I will be back with a Christmas special for December. So if any of you have got any books you'd like me to talk about, that you think you're sitting there going, why doesn't she talk about this? This is one of the best books that I've ever read. Just be in touch. Leave your comments at the bottom of the YouTube film, and I will see if I've read them and if I like them. I only do the books that I really, really like. Because I think that it's about celebrating writers and writing and sharing our enthusiasm for books that we have in common. So for now, as always, just remember it doesn't matter what you read, but enjoy it. And for November, this is Kate Mosse signing off. See you next time.